Hello, everyone. Greetings from Helsinki and welcome you all to the October seminar of the HealthSUS Global South Encounters. So this is to let you know that this seminar is being recorded. In a few minutes, we are going to discuss Pluriverse, education, and territorial justice. My name is Chaitawat Boonjubun, a postdoctoral researcher in global development studies at the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Helsinki. Let me introduce our fantastic panelists. We have 4 speakers today. The first speaker is senior lecturer and also associate professor Paola Minoia. She is a senior lecturer in global development studies at the University of Helsinki and an associate professor in political and economic geography at the University of Turin. Her research interests intersect the fields of political ecology and development studies with a focus on territoriality, state and minoritized groups relations, socio-environmental justice, eco-cultural knowledges, and the Pluriverse. She is the principal investigator of the eco-cultural pluralism in the Ecuadorian Amazonia project, which is funded by the Academy of Finland, and a WG leader in the EU course network, Decolonizing Development Research, Teaching and Practice. So welcome, Paola. The second speaker is Associate Professor José Castro-Sotomayor. He is assistant professor at California State University, Channel Islands. Originally from Ecuador, his work focuses on transversal forms of communication, agency, and dissent that inform participatory models for environmental peacekeeping and decision and policy making. He is the co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of Eco-Cultural Identity. Welcome, Jose. The third speaker is Dr. Johanna Hohenthal. She is a postdoctoral researcher in global development studies at the University of Helsinki. She works for the Goal 4+, including eco-cultural pluralism in quality education in Ecuadorian Amazonia research projects. Her research interests focus on the accessibility of intercultural bilingual education and its relation to indigenous territoriality and place-based learning, as well as participatory research methods. Glad to have you here with us, Johanna. And the last but not least speaker is Dr. Tuija. Veintie. She is a postdoctoral researcher at Global Development Studies, University of Helsinki. Her research interests include social justice and diversity issues, epistemic power hierarchies, intercultural and indigenous education, as well as minority and indigenous people's rights. Her current research focuses on the integration of ecological and indigenous knowledge in intercultural bilingual upper secondary education in Ecuador. Her study is part of the research project Goal 4+, including eco-cultural pluralism in quality Ecuador in Ecuadorian Amazonia. Welcome, Tuija. Each speaker will have about 6 minutes to talk. Then we will have about 30 minutes for comments, discussion, and responses from our speakers. So now I'm going to give the floor to Paola. So Paola, you can spend more than 6 minutes because I know that you're going to introduce the panelists, yeah, and your projects. So please, Paola.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And I hope that you can see my screen. So this is, I don't repeat the title again because it was said already, but it's important to say that as a preamble, that we have done this work together in collaboration with the Universidad Estatal Amazonica, which is a public university based in the indigenous territory of Pastaza in the Amazonian region of Ecuador. Here is the blog where we have our updates of the work that we do. So we invite everyone to look and see it and give us also some feedback, possibly. So Pastaza hosts 7 out of the 14 nationalities recognized in the country, plus other ethnic groups, and an enormous biodiversity that is preserved by the indigenous people living in the forest. However, the curricula, here there are names of schools that were included in the project, but we have focused especially in the Quechua region, and which is this one quite large, and the Shuar. So especially working with upper secondary schools and the University Estatal Amazonica that is based here in Puyo. So Puyo is the capital city of the province. Despite the fact that these university and schools are in this indigenous territory, so the curricula proposed by the public education is disconnected from the rich and diverse world in which the people live. What do we mean by quality education then, if the proposed one doesn't reflect and nurture the knowledges that exist and are used in the areas? And how could the state guarantee education for all, a promise that has been done also internationally with the Sustainable Development Goals? So how is it possible that when the programs are in Spanish and disconnected from the territories, from the land, the environment, the languages, the cultures, the people with their way of lives, cosmologies, knowledges, and beliefs? So how sustainable is an education of this kind, and how much exclusion it perpetuates? So in this model of Western education, students living in non-urban territories remain invisible and tend to even deny their identity to avoid persistent racism. So our research team has studied various types of challenges lived by the students of the Pastaza territories that are, compared to other ethnic groups, are those that have a lower scholarity index. So more will be said by Johanna and Tuija about the specific research work done related to place-based education and the application of the intercultural program that the state and indigenous organizations have negotiated. And then José will speak more about the meaning of the pluriversal education, I think, and he will give us a definition of the humilocene. And I would like to thank José, because he is based far away in the United States, and for him it's 6 o'clock in the morning. So thanks a lot for being here with us and give us this speech. So as said, our work has been done in collaboration with local scholars and members of indigenous groups. Although this collaboration has been challenged during the past 2 years by the recent events, some of them we know, the pandemic, but there was before that also a national strike in 2019, and also during the pandemic time there was a series of natural catastrophes, especially what the pictures show was the effect of a massive spillover of oil that had contaminated one of the biggest ones, the biggest one of the past 15 years, that has contaminated the wet area. And then there was also dramatic flood that has washed away houses and other structures. So this situation is created by the coloniality of capitalist extraction that is normalized by a culture of growth of Western origin that has inspired public education programs as well. So in the attempt of modernizing the country. So the state has continued the colonial spoliation of their territories and increased through mining plantations, oil extraction, and water channeling. So the basis for all the land-based living and knowledges and spiritualities of the indigenous people have been dispossessed. So the ontological, they live in a territory that, on the contrary, is seen according to the modern. I'm also a geographer, so that's why I think that it's quite relevant to look at the maps of the power, and showing the flat ontology of exclusion. So these are the territorial areas which are intersecting also the territorial blocks of the mining and of the oil concessions to international corporations, and this ontological coexistence then is impossible with extractivist mining practices that play against the living beings. So against this economic and cultural pressure that have perpetuated social and environmental injustices, the indigenous organizations have been able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of indigenous people, especially through the work of CONAIE, the umbrella organization, unifying many other national representatives. So and this mobilization turned, was successful because it returned the control over large territories to affirm also the political necessity for a plurinational state, a principle that is in the Constitution of 2008. But even before, interculturality was seen as a prerequisite for the plurinationalism. And from the late 80s, CONAIE was able to negotiate the right to intercultural bilingual education in the territories for the recognition and revitalization of the cultures of the territories. So the intercultural bilingual programs were launched as inspired by the principle of summa causae, when we are living well, based on a caring relationality of all beings. In the pluriverse, a plurality of ontologies and epistemic experiences coexist in a diversity of worlds. Recognizing the pluriverse allows a different views of the world, cosmologies and knowledges to be respected, recognized, and revived. Knowing and being the forest and being the forest is a way of life that respects the biodiversity in its all forms of life. This means, first of all, the use of indigenous languages, land-based education, and ethno-education. Family members, and especially the yachaks, the wise men having, and women, so they have been integrated in the community schools as they have the knowledge and experience to teach ancestral knowledges and practices, such as fishing, hunting, rowing, collecting medicinal plants, recognizing the birds and the fauna, all these in classes of sessions outside the school walls, or in classes of cosmovisions, or while taking Guayusa before the sunrise. The students are called then to participate in village gatherings, festivals, or in the Minga, the communitarian work, and be able to take modules in accordance to the household chores in their farms, the chakra, without losing any entire years. These were the principles of the community schools connected to the ecological rhythms of the living forest. So intercultural education can protect the forest and the communities and support youth empowerment through education. However, a lot has been dismantled of these since 2011 with the law that imposed the closure of community schools, the misrecognition of the yachaks, the wise, and the closure of higher education, also forming intercultural teachers and the indigenous university Amautaiwasi. Korea has, on the contrary, opened millennium schools close to new villages of oil extraction, and 4 technical universities newly built and fully equipped in line with the progressive goal of modernization of the country, with the public expenditures using the revenues from the concession of oil extraction to the private companies. Then the government that has followed the one of Lenin Moreno have launched the intercultural education, but just as a lip service in terms of claims and in great austerity without funding. So, and the new government of Guillermo Lasso has proposed, on the contrary, a massive return of the capitalist extractivist model to pay the IMF debt, which is the first priority. And his program, there's no room for intercultural education or the respect of plurinationalism or social and environmental justice. And that's why the social movements have now, since yesterday, retaken the streets to fight the reform. So land-based education is beyond the land as a resource or a physical space. It is a place of reproduction of ancestral knowledges and practices. It is the familiar land of Ayu, or the territory of the nationality Yachta, or the living forest, the Causa Sacha. The Causa Sacha, I read now what has been conceptualized by the Quechua community of Sarayaco. It is understood as a sacred territory. Is it the primordial source of Suma Causae? The Causa Sacha recognizes that the forest is made up entirely of living selves and the communicative relations they have with each other. The selves, from the smallest plants to the supreme beings who protect the forest, are persons, Runa, who inhabited the waterfalls, lagoons, swamps, mountains, and rivers, and who in turn compose the living forest as a whole. These persons live together in community, the Yachta, and carry out their lives in a manner that is similar to human beings. And to summarize, in the living forest, the economic system is an ecological web, and the natural world is also a social world. So to conclude, as it was already stated by Freire, education is necessarily a form of politics, and it's never neutral. And land-based education then allows relationality, seeking connections and correlations, and supporting life and agency. Thank you.
We cannot hear you.
Oh, thank you very much, Paola. Now the floor is your Jose. Please, Jose.
Well, good afternoon with everyone. Early morning on this side of the Blue Marble. First of all, I would like to thank the Helsinki Institute of Sustainability and Science for inviting me to be part of this Global South Encounter series. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the invisible workers whose work has made this event possible. I would like to start saying that I am sharing this time with you from the California State University Channel Islands, whose campus is located in territory of the Chumash Mi'kmaq Native American people on the slopes on the Mount Sadwiwa, a sacred site where the Chumash gather for the winter solstice and establish shrines to celebrate harmony, healing, forgiveness, and compassion. These types of land recognition declarations are not a substitute for much needed action to support sovereignty and autonomy of indigenous people. I titled my presentation, Engaging Ecocultural Identities Toward Pluriversal Education in the Humilocene. I would like to contribute with some theoretical and conceptual ideas, and hopefully at the end I can illustrate what I want to, all the kind of the concepts I want to share with you today. I will spend some time defining these key terms and then briefly reflecting on how these ideas can contribute to the conversation about a needed transformative education as the Pluriverse proposed. Let me start with the concept of ecocultural identity. With my colleague Tema Milstay, we propose this concept or framework to contribute to the ecological turn to sociocultural understandings of self. The ecological turn in conceptualizations of identity stems from the assumption that humans are made of, are part of, engage from, and constantly contribute to both ecology and culture. So as ecocultural beings, we humans produce, act upon, and constantly perceive and make meaning through both ecology and culture. However, as a concept, ecocultural identity differs from other eco-oriented approaches that have theorized about the influence of the environment or nature. Personally, I prefer using the term more than human world. So the influence of the more than human world on identity formation. For instance, we find eco-oriented identity theories, including those of ecological identity, environmental identity, green identity. However, these conceptualizations stem from social psychology, which could render some analytical limitations. The first limitation is that these eco-oriented definitions require static definitions of ecology and environment, which can be misrepresented as separated spaces from humans. Second, the second limitation is that individuals or groups must consciously purpose enacting these eco-oriented identities, which leads us to the third analytical limitation, is that ecological, green, or environmental identities are normative because their development and realization depends on the individuals or groups' conscious engagement with behaviors that are considered environmentally friendly. For instance, recycling or buying local food, participating in pro-environmental movements, or enacting ways of living that show a deep and respectful connection to what we call nature. Right? So I would like to kind of state at the beginning, because it is important to know that the ecocultural identity is not a normative or ecocentric concept by default. That is, that contrary to ecological, environmental, or green identities, ecocultural identity is not prescriptive. What I mean by this is that the actions associated with ecocultural identities are not always positive or beneficial for the environment. So it comes to be part of the really complex web of identity intersections that that form our sense of self within the larger web of social, cultural, and ecological interactions. For example, a local farmer, a miner, a hunter, now that I am in California, even a surfer, right, an environmentalist, all have ecocultural identities as their sense of self is defined by their beliefs, their values, their attitudes that inform how they act or relate to the more than human world. Therefore, an ecocultural identity helps us gain further understanding about the relationships between humans and the more than human world by challenging the anthropocentric assumptions on which the cultural is built, and understood and seeks the understanding of humans at the intersections between the symbolic and the biotic. So this is basically what I wanted to say about ecocultural identity, because we usually take the eco usually in very positive terms, almost by default. So in my interpretation, the path toward the pluriverse and the construction of situated pluriversal education must engage ecocultural identities, because whether latent or conscious, an ecocultural identity is at the center of who humans are and do, and inform emotional, bodily, mental, and political sensitivities within and in relation to the encompassing world in which we live, along with other human and non-human living beings. So with this concept in mind, I would like to approach the second concept, which is the pluriverse. And here I would like to focus on three designed and redesigned principles that Arturo Escobar outlines as part of what he calls pluriversal politics. So in a very nutshell, in a very brief idea of these principles are, and I take the liberty to quote some parts in these definitions, are three principles. The first is the recommunalization of social life to counter the individualizing imperative of human interaction. The second principle is the relocalization of activities like food, health, and education, and the strengthening of local and regional economies to counter capitalist globalization and foster convivial modes of living. And the third principle is the strengthening of collective local autonomies and direct forms of democracy as a means to lessen the dependence on norms established by experts and the state, critically revalorize local knowledges and values, and promote horizontal political strategies based on people's self-organization. So informed by these principles, a pluriversal education becomes a transformative strategy for decolonization of the mind, the liberation of our larger body, Earth, and the countering of ostensible universal knowledges and ways of being. But the more relevant to the argument I want to offer here is that the strategy of recommunalizing, relocating, and revalorizing will nurture the humilocene. The humilocene is a term that the eco-philosopher David Abram uses to challenge the human-centered framework of the Anthropocene. And by the humilocene, he describes a new epoch of humility, a step in both humiliation and humility. According to Abram, the Humilocene is a regenerative, ethical, and empathetic framework within which multiple ecologies of sensory experience interlock. So this new epoch of humility demands a long due dialogue between ancient and renewed ways of being human, as a species, as animals, and as sensory bodies. I think ecocultural identity and the Humilocene contribute to the conversation about an urgent transformative education, a pluriversal education, in two ways. The first is that ecocultural identity states that our group and individual cultural affiliations and practices are inextricably connected to the ecological dimensions. This ontological realization rejects culturalism and challenges anthropocentric constructions of sense of self, which allow us to direct attention to and break from the prevalent contemporary narcissistic human posture threatening existence on our planet. That way the humiliation and humility comes into place. Thus, the concept and framework of ecocultural identity is useful to think of an education, a pluriversal education, that critically engages with the new rationalities and sensibilities that emerge from the environmental disruption and climate crisis that have rattled people's daily lives, unsettled normalcy, and undermined safety. The second, using the Humilocene as a horizon of practice in general and education in particular, the strategic principles of recommunalizing our sense of self, relocating political and economic power, and revalorizing knowledges have the potential to humbling humans' planetary position as it calls for a radical reassessment of humanity's role in the health and well-being of the earthly membrane of relationality, complementarity, integrality, and reciprocity that connects us all in the web of life. Advancing thus an education that weaves different paths toward what the pluriverse is, a world of many worlds. So I would like to close my presentation by going back to the idea that pluriversal education must be situated. To do so, education must be placed within the cultural and political arrangements of territoriality. And I believe Paola's, Tuija, and Johanna's work is a good example of this kind of approach. So I approach territoriality as both as pragmatic and constitutive environmental communication. I am a communicator by training, so my approach comes from a communication perspective. So territoriality is deeply rooted in indigenous and Afro conceptions of territory, and territoriality allows us to disentangle the ways communities exert or may exert symbolic and political control on their territories. Territory is the place of situational interactions and human and non-human relationships, which foster new forms of ecocultural identities, whose relationships both exceed sociocultural categories such as race, ethnicity, and class, and position non-human actors, land, trees, rivers, mountains, as constitutive forces for human existence. Interrogating what is to be human in relation to the larger body of the territory has political implications, as eco-political identities emerging from human and more than human entanglements require new forms of governing spaces. In other words, autonomous forms of existence, what indigenous people call self-determination, and autonomous political organizing and decision-making, which they call self-governance. Finally, within territoriality, territory's web of human and more than human relationships becomes the realm of signification from which to interrogate the premises supporting global discourses, such as development, sustainability, climate change, and in this particular case, education. My last point would be kind of paying attention to territory's constitutive power, illuminate ways in which these discourses are instrumentalized, recontextualized, and in place when entering territory's discursive field. I would like to conclude by reiterating that to advance a pluriversal education, we must embrace what Enrique Lev's calls when geography becomes verb. As the naming of the territory brings about historical sedimented practices, what we usually know traditional ecological knowledges. It resignifies landscapes. For instance, the idea of sacred spaces is pretty profound here, and offers repertoires of meaning that emerge through particular patterns of engagement and struggle implicated in the formation of regenerative ethics of care. Only then, place-based education could be decolonial and pluriversal, And I do believe that my fellow colleagues in this panel have a really good examples of what this means. If given the opportunity later in the talk, I can offer kind of an illustration of what territoriality is in more pragmatic terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Now, the next question is, the next speaker is Johanna. Please, Johanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will try to share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see this. Okay, so I will tell you a bit of our research that we have been doing with Tuija and our colleagues in Ecuador. And it's titled Fostering Indigenous Young People's Socio-Environmental Consciousness Through Place-Based Learning in Ecuadorian Amazonia. As you are very well aware, Amazonian region and the indigenous territories therein are affected by various socio-environmental changes that are linked to resource extraction and the global climate change. Therefore, we think that the development of the critical consciousness that allows the recognition of the social and environmental injustices is important within the young generation, who are the future leaders and defenders of the indigenous territories. Our research argues for the importance of place-based learning for enhancing the indigenous young people's understanding of environmental changes and building and sustaining their territorial connections. We perceive place-based education as an umbrella term that brings together various pedagogical approaches that recognize place as a primary component of human ecocultural experience and learning, as well as counteracts universalizing approaches to knowledge and teaching. The schools and educational institutes that engage in place-based education and aim at contributing to social transformation also need to engage in pluriversality, which means the recognition that multiple knowledges, ontologies, and epistemologies may coexist. In this study, we are particularly interested to look at how schooling students' independent learning, experiential learning, and learning with the family and community may form complementary and overlapping learning spaces in which the youth can engage with diverse environmental knowledges of the pluriverse. Our research focuses on indigenous young people who study in intercultural bilingual upper secondary schools in the Pastaza province of Ecuadorian Amazonia. We have three more specific research questions, which are how the young people perceive socio-environmental issues that affect their living environments, in which ways do young people's daily world of experience, interaction with family and indigenous community and schooling support their place-based learning, develop their critical socio-environmental consciousness, and strengthen their territorial ties. And finally, how could the place-based approach contribute to pluriversalizing the intercultural bilingual education? We visited 3 IB upper secondary schools in the Pastaza province in 2019 and produced data via participatory mapping, photo elicitation, observation, and interviews to study young people's perceptions and learning about the socio-environmental issues in their living areas. And here just briefly some results and conclusions. So our study recognizes that the diversity of learning environments is important for the development of critical socio-environmental consciousness of the indigenous young people. When young people encounter socio-environmental issues such as flooding, littering, mining, and so on, those offer teachable moments for them. For example, when students encounter floods, which are common in the region, they can observe how rivers change and learn how to find their new routes to cross the rivers in varying circumstances. However, beside this kind of experiential inquiry, it would be important for the students to discuss with the teachers at school how the floods and heavy rains affect indigenous communities and how they are linked to climatic patterns, global climate change, and land cover changes upstream. Observation of, for example, gold mining and the construction of hydropower plant also offer possibilities to reflect on power relations between the indigenous community and other actors in relation to extractive activities that could also be discussed further at school. The students also learn from their family members about trees, medicinal plants and animals, as well as traditional skills related to hunting, fishing, making and driving canoes, farming and making handicrafts and chicha. Learning in the family is often place-based and experiential, as the young people learn when they fish, hunt or cultivate crops together with their family members. These teachable moments are related to ancestral knowledge, relationality and values, which can foster young people's ties with the indigenous culture and territory. However, the socio-environmental issues that threaten the indigenous territories are often discussed in community meetings rather than with the families. Therefore, participation in community meetings provides potential teachable moments for young people to cultivate their critical territorial and environmental consciousness. Finally, we also look at how the socio-environmental issues are discussed at school. So several students mentioned that they have had opportunities to learn about local environmental issues, history and indigenous knowledge and cosmovision at school. However, our study shows that there is more room to connect academic activities with the knowledge that students acquire from their families, communities and interaction with the local socio-environmental issues. Furthermore, we found very little evidence that the students reflect on the deeper meanings or political aspects of the socio-environmental issues that they had observed. It is common for education to position itself as politically neutral and to refrain from addressing the aspects of power, culture, and economy that have shaped the socio-environmental realities of places. This inhibits the holistic understanding and critical reflection of the relationship between humans and nature. The incorporation of local and indigenous knowledges in the teaching, however, may be challenging, particularly for the teachers whose own background, education and pedagogical training has been in the Eurocentric tradition. In Ecuador, a large number of teachers in IB schools are mestizos who do not speak the indigenous language and have not received adequate training in intercultural education. Thus, we suggest initial or in-service teacher education for raising teachers' awareness of environmental issues, colonial histories, indigenous knowledge, and place-based approaches in education. This may help teachers reflect on their disposition and question Eurocentric thinking, and it may help find ways to apply place-based and indigenous pedagogical approaches and instruction methods. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna. Moving now to the last speaker, Tuija. Please, Tuija, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Chaitawat. Thank you. I'm trying to share my screen here. I hope you can see it now. My name is Tuija Veintie, and today my topic, my title of the speak is Connecting Schooling with Indigenous Community Life Through Community Experiential Educational Calendars. So this is based on work that we have been doing in collaboration with the project and with particularly with Anders Siren from the Inti Anka Taripai organization in Ecuador. If we think about schooling and school activities, they are typically organized according to academic timetables and semesters and teaching periods or examination times taking place in certain months of the year and so on and so forth. And also the school weeks and school days are organized according to schedules for classes of a certain variety of academic subjects. What indigenous peoples, for example, in Ecuador and in many other places as well, argue is that these kinds of school calendars and schedules make one of the big conflicts between the indigenous population and the national education system. The schedule separated the colonial imposition of Western way of organizing time and space and compartmentalizing teaching into time slots of specific subjects. Now, of course, the Gregorian calendar that we are using in most parts of the world nowadays is only one way of organizing units of time, and it's good to remember that many cultures have developed their respective calendar systems based on their own interests and needs in marking and organizing time already a long time ago in different parts of the world. And for example, in Latin America, the Maya and the Mexica, the Azteca in Mexico, as well as the Inca in the southern parts of Latin America, have elaborated their own systems of measuring and organizing time. And these systems, they are based on rigorous observation of natural phenomena and high knowledge in mathematics and astronomy. So the Inca, for example, developed their agricultural and festive calendar based on their astronomical knowledge. The Inca influence is quite significant, of course, in the Ecuadorian contemporary culture and other Andean indigenous cultures today. And also still today, many Latin American indigenous communities have an interest toward a calendar based on the worldview and experiences of the indigenous communities. Such calendars have been elaborated also in schools. We have examples, so for example, in Peru and Mexico, of these kinds of local calendars that have been elaborated, particularly in schools. And these calendars, well, they have different names. Some call them agro-festive and ritual calendars, others call them socio-natural calendars or socio-cultural calendars. But whatever the name is, the reason for elaborating the calendar is to adjust school activities with the local indigenous time and space. So the idea is to support and revitalize the intimate relationship between society and nature, the relationality of beings, all different beings in the world. So this kind of relationality is one of the fundamental epistemic characteristics in the thinking of many indigenous peoples and nationalities in the Americas, both in the North and in the South America. And this relationality, it goes beyond the human beings and nature. If we think about the Quechua and Shuar of the Amazon region, for example, the relationality also entails the relationship between the world of human beings and the spiritual worlds below the ground and above in the sky. Yeah. And for example, well, if we go straight to Ecuador, within the intercultural bilingual education system, the IBE system, there is an idea of a sociocultural calendar introduced already in the early 90s, in the 1993 actually, when the IBE system was established first time in Ecuador. But there were times when these calendars were not such a high priority in the IB policy in the country. But in 2017, the Ministry of Education published a book of IB guidelines for the schools. And these guidelines highlight that each intercultural bilingual school should develop their respective community experiential educational calendar. So in the guidelines, the calendar is presented as an essential element in supporting students to maintain the link between the school or the cultural experiences and schooling. So here we can see in this picture, we can see one model of a calendar as given in the guidelines. So this is not from any particular community, but it is a model to give an idea what the calendar could look like. The important elements are here presented mainly as images, or these little images here in the circles around the calendar. According to the guidelines by the Ministry of Education, the calendar should be accompanied by cartillas de saberes, kind of the knowledge cards, which then formal educational material that explain each part of the calendar a bit more in detail. Now, one particularly important aspect in the relational ontology of the Quechua and Shuar, several other indigenous peoples, is that time and space is commonly conceptualized in a circular way, or sometimes in a spiral way. And also these calendars are evidently, they are circular. And usually they are read counterclockwise, so that the time runs from right to the left. And this circular counterclockwise presentation of time and multiple activities makes an important difference when compared, for example, with the general school calendars that we saw in the first picture of this presentation. So here we can see some examples. This is an example of a calendar elaborated in one school in Quechua speaking school in Pastaza region. It does not have all the elements included yet. It's a draft, but it's in form of a spider's net. It's mostly in Quechua, so it's a bit more challenging to understand, but we can take a look at another example, a calendar from another school, which is mostly in Spanish, some words in Quechua. But anyway, here, what we can see, sorry, this is also a draft. So there are lots of white spaces still, and not everything is included yet. It's a draft version. But anyway, what we can see here is that each circle of the calendar represents a certain theme. So in the smallest circle, in a circle, we can see the seasons of the year. So here it's described as season of production and season of scarcity in production. It can be something else in other calendars. Then there are the names of the months in Spanish and in Quechua in this one. These are according to the Gregorian calendar from January to December. Now the next circle is about agricultural and other productive activities. So for example, times for planting or harvesting. It could also be fishing seasons or something else. The next circle then is the sociocultural events. There are, for example, mingas, the collective work parties, or local festivals. There's also the word purina, which means the farming and hunting areas deeper in the rainforest, where the families usually go during the school vacation times.
I'm sorry, Tuija, you have 1 minute to wrap up.
1 minute, okay. And then there is a circle of spiritual practices. I'm going to skip this to the science in nature, and the outer circle that represents the educational activities in school. So reading festival, excursions, school pro days, all kinds of things that are also in the school calendar that comes from the Ministry of Education. But in what we can see in the community experiential educational calendar is that it provides a visual representation of the school activities and the sociocultural reality of the community and the multiple life cycles at the same time and in relation with each other. So the elaboration and use of these kinds of calendars in schools can actually provide an opening towards the pluriversality in the sense of helping to recognize that multiple knowledges coexist, that multiple onto-epistemologies coexist, and that attention to this kind of onto-epistemic plurality should be paid also in school and in relation to school activities. So what the teachers and school directors who we interviewed saw in the calendars, they thought that this is an important tool for revitalizing Indigenous knowledge and to help young people understand the value of Indigenous and local knowledge. They also say that these calendars can be used as a tool for planning the school year and making the lesson plans. So ideally, the calendar can really help in connecting school instruction with nature and with community sociocultural life. And this way, the interconnection between nature, community, and schooling can be fostered. Of course, there are many challenges in actually applying the calendars, but I will not go into that right now. Just thank you for your attention, and in case of any questions, you can also reach me by email from this address shown here, and also there's the blog address for the project blog where we are writing about some topics related to our research studies. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tuija, and thank you our panelists for wonderful presentations. Now the floor is open to everyone. So if you like to ask questions or give comments, you can do so by using the raise hand symbol, or type your questions or comments to the chat box, and I will read them for you. We have about 10 minutes for the discussion. So anyone would like to ask question? Perhaps I can start with, I have one question to the panelists. So everyone, anyone can answer. What is the relationship between territoriality and education?
If you want me, I can share. And actually, I was thinking, how can I ground a little bit the discussion? And if you allow me to briefly show you something that I have, just time constraints sometimes helps. This is an interpretation of what I was talking about, what territoriality is. And as you can see, you know, after Johanna's kind of illustrations, this is kind of pretty stiff, right? It's kind of my own Western self just coming in, you know, placing and categorizing. But the notion of territoriality, I was commenting this idea of the symbolic control and the political control of the territory connects this notion of lineage, sacred, and land, and that connects with the principles of cosmopolitics of in this particular case in indigenous people. I kind of illustrated the notion of territoriality based on my work with the binational indigenous people, Agua, who are located at the border between Ecuador and Colombia. So what I commented in my presentation about the notion of geography becomes verb is that the political and the cultural actions the indigenous people usually take moves toward the notion of cultural governmentality and territorial governance. And can I give you an illustration how this idea of territoriality connects with territory? We need to understand that education is one of what I may call kind of the units of action. Right? So taking the example of my work with the Agua people, so you have the relationships and the relationships that they establish within the territory, the lineage, the sacred, and the land, and the principles of how the cosmopolitics that guide their political and organizational action. And which takes into consideration what they call Katsasu, which is their territory. Right? In the symbolic part of the territoriality, you have the notion of cultural governmentality. They call it the cultural science. And I believe the representation that Johanna showed about the calendar, for instance, is part of this cultural science. But there is also part of the education is embedded also in territorial governance, because they move towards the notion of indigenous and pushing to address indigenous land rights. Where does education fit here, in my understanding at least, is in the idea of cultural governmentality. So one of the units of action that I identified in my collaboration with Agua is that family and education that go together in the notion of cultural governmentality. You know, the cultural science or the base for education or pluriversal education, it is between this association. And Tuija also mentioned that the family is fundamentally in education, and the connection and the experiences they have within their territory is part of this construction of cultural science, right? Connecting cultural identity and the idea of unity within the territory. But education and cultural governmentality cannot be understood without thinking the notion of borders and indigenous guards, because they mention that it is only through the territorial control and the legitimation of their land, or being they recognized as owners of the land, the advancement of any kind of knowledge cannot be possible. And I believe kind of this is sort of representative of what I was talking about, how education connects with territoriality in terms of these elements about knowledge, identity, and language in this particular case.
Thank you very much, Jose. We have comments from Professor Barry Giles. There is an emerging concept relevant to this discussion by Jose, the Symbiocene, which is being defined as a period of history of humanity on Earth, which will be characterized by human intelligence and practice that replicate the symbiotic and mutually reinforcing life reproducing forms and processes found in the living systems. And there is one question from Sabaheta. This is a long question. So this will depend on the student's age, place of living, and many other factors. But if you would have to generalize, how would you describe the indigenous youth approach to Eurocentric / Western culture and education? Do you see it as something imposed and that needs to be changed or abandoned? Or do they aspire to it and see it as the only way of development and way forward?
I can say something.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, yeah, this is a great question, actually. Of course, they are not all the same, and it really depends very much from the area, from the territory in which they live. So there are areas which are still, you know, quite, how to say, with the, how to say, where the community has a clear control and governance of the territory, and then there are, however, many families that move or are in territories where there has been a lot of migration, because we don't have to consider the indigenous territories all as having uniform communities, but because especially also in the, I mean, from the 60s onwards, there has been a lot of intervention of flows of people, I mean, landless people from also other areas that were given land in those forested territories. So in many places there is a mixture, and so that you have classes that are, especially in urban centers, you have classes that are not homogeneous, and then the vehicular language is Spanish, and the model is the common one, and is the Spanish. And in these situations, the indigenous peoples don't even self-identify as indigenous, and they claim, I mean, because also in the entrance they can specify from which ethnic group they come, and they don't give an answer. So, and this happens especially when there is the risk of racialization and discrimination. So in that case, it's running after, you know, something, a model that leaves you behind. So in the contrary, there are communities that are, for instance, it's you know, the classical case is the one of the Sarayaco community, but also others in which how to say, the social mobilization and the sharing of the same worldview or the traditional ancestral knowledge is still alive. And there is really a dilemma of the families. So what to do? Do we want to, you know, have for our kids, you know, a future outside of this community, or do we live maybe, I mean, not in isolation, because now anyway, I mean, many are in contact through also social media, WhatsApp, and so on with the rest of the world. But still, they don't see themselves as behind, as primitive, but they see the importance of living the causa sacha. So they are part of the forest, and it is something that even the new generations, we can see that they really are united in the fight. And I think that this is also in the media, that they have through also these international connections through the media, they are able to reach out also other social movements in a web that sustain each other. And so they are not isolated at all. And they on the contrary, they are supported. So they were able, for instance, to fight also a lot of, state concessions, for more extractions that were also supported with the military tanks and so on. But the people have first, being in the street, fighting peacefully, and then they have the help also of legal advice, legal support, so that they could go to the, for instance, Inter-American Court of Justice, or to other, to other also national courts, and they won. So I think that it's being conserving an identity as indigenous identity is something that is something that young people want to continue.
Thank you very much, Paola. So I'm afraid this is time that I would like to bring this seminar to a close. And thank you once again to our fantastic speakers, and thanks to you all. I hope we keep in touch, and looking forward to your participation in future Health events and activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.